But some of the major downsides in this case would be, firstly, the link of socioeconomic status. And that's the most powerful confounding variable, I think, in this instance. The higher in ultra-processed food content someone's diet contains, the more likely they are to be lower income, lower educational attainment, other similar markers of socioeconomic disadvantage. And that's just the reality. So we know that independently is one of the strongest predictors of poor health outcomes just across the board. So really what we're dealing with is ultra processed food just a proxy in this case, as opposed to, the end all be all. It's because they're eating this. It's really just that, like, well, hey, these people are not making these choices, but they're sort of, it's deeply embedded in that way of life. And that really the bigger issue underlying that is just the, some of those unfortunate issues.
For sure.
The last thing I'll say about that is, in environments of lower socioeconomic status, there's more of this, they call it a permissive pattern, where the highest intake of ultra-processed foods like hamburgers, soft drinks, things we mentioned, they were greatly associated with those households. So these parents were those that may not have held jobs, they were living in social housing, those sort of things. In contrast, if we look at restrictive patterns, that's those with the lowest intake of ultra-processed foods. And of course, it's associated with higher socioeconomic status. So there's just all these things underpinning certain dietary choices. And sure, if you're in a situation that lends itself to much more fast food, cheaper foods, every single food has some level of processing, some level of added sodium, some level, and you couple it with the next tier, lifestyle factors. Those that are consuming the most ultra processed foods, they're way more likely to engage in other unhealthy behaviors, less physical activity, more smoking, more sedentary time, things that are independent risk factors alone. So you begin to combine all these things. Like, was it really just the level of processing here that's driving people insane? I don't think it is, and there's my inflammatory stance. I think it's the processing is certainly absolutely a part of the conversation. Is it the magic bullet? I really doubt it.
I look at even just my grocery situation, and I buy a lot of fruits and vegetables, but we buy some processed food too. And I never end up throwing away the processed food because it stays. Yep. And I end up, my kids eat a lot of fruit and vegetables, and so do I. I end up throwing away a lot of apples and a lot of fruit and a lot of lettuce. And even if you say, well, look, it's only the X dollars. Well, the reality is some of that stuff's getting thrown away. The processed food never does. I think the socioeconomic thing is absolutely valid.
Default, like there becomes a default into what you stock your home with.
Yeah.
Yep. It's convenience, it's cost, it's your background, it's all those things that lend itself to a decision. And so I'm not claiming that I have the answer to unwind those things. And at what link in the chain do we go back and educate and inject money here, or do this, or government involvement, ban this food, do this food, put this star on it, A+, C+, like what? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's just complicates the entire understanding. And then the last thing with these studies is just overall diet quality. High ultra processed food intake, almost by definition, is a marker of poor overall diet quality, right? They're consistently shown to be lower in fruit, vegetables, fiber, and then usually higher in total energy. And this is due to higher sugar.
You mean calories?
Yes. Total calories, energy, synonymous. Yes. In this case, added sugar, there's added sodium, and then these added, for a while, it was trans fats, and now it's just general saturated fats for the most part. And so this raises the whole chicken or the egg question that we've come back to time and time again. Is the harm caused by these foods themselves and the presence of these foods? Or is it because their diet is made up largely of these foods, and there's this absence then of the nutrient dense protective foods that can start to maybe offset some of these choices that you make in eating processed foods? So there is just this like you always say, like, well, what are you replacing with? What did we displace these foods with? And if that's all you're surrounded by, and you're sick of throwing away your spinach every week, then guess what? You're going to buy the frozen and you're going to buy the canned, or you're just going to skip some of the produce altogether. So what are we replacing it with? We can mitigate the risks associated with some of these foods by adding more oatmeal, adding more fruit, more foods that are high in fiber, and you can counteract it. So it's not saying that like you can just out eat a bad diet per se.
Yeah.
But there is this level of like somebody eating 80% processed foods versus 50%. It raises a good question.